This week on Perspective, weapons of war, the growing global military budget. Not since the end of the Cold War has military spending around the globe reached this level. $1.8 trillion, according to recently released data from the respected Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Now, admittedly, that's still less than half the U.S. federal budget. But in the last 20 years, global military spending has increased 76%. The world's two biggest economies, the U.S. and China, are not surprisingly the two biggest spenders, accounting for half of the world's military spending. The U.S. is by far the biggest spender and increased its spending last year by more than 4%. China's spending has steadily increased over the past quarter of a century, reflecting growth in its economy, and its military spending is now 10 times what it was a quarter of a century ago. For the first time, Russia dropped out of the top 5 big spenders. Its spending last year decreased by 3.5%. Also this week, Russia and China displayed some of their military might in joint exercises in the Chinese port city of Qingdao and in the East China and Yellow Seas. So what story do these latest military budgets tell? We're going to try to get at some of that in the program today. We'll speak to a noted expert on U.S. defense spending and take a closer look at Russia and China as well. We'll also have some Canadian perspectives. But we begin with the numbers and Pieter Wezeman. He's a senior researcher with the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, the independent organization which collected the military spending data. First, tell me how you would describe the significance of the increase in global military spending. How significant is it?
It is, if you compare 2017 to 2018, a relatively small increase, but it is the second year in which we see an increase. And I think we have seen in the past period, so from the mid-1990s up until about 2010, there was a very steep increase. Then there was kind of a plateau, but now it is increasing again, and that I think we think is quite significant. A tendency to again increase military spending deserves further in-depth discussion.
I was going to say, what does it represent? Why is it concerning for you?
It is concerning for two reasons. One of them, of course, is that military spending means that you can't spend on other things like education, health, etc. But of course, there might be very good reasons to spend on your defense too. But still, it is a significant sum, and that needs very good scrutiny. And secondly, of course, an increase in military spending also raises the question if states are feeling more threatened, and to which extent states feel that military means are the right answer to security problems and also an important tool in their foreign policy. And I think that's also something which requires more attention.
You point out in the report that much of the increase is due to the United States and China. And what does that suggest to you?
Let's start with China. In the case of China, we've seen that it has increased its military spending continuously over the past 24 years. And it has continuously followed the growth of the economy. So if the economy grows with 5%, then military spending can be expected to grow with 5% too. So it's kind of a long-term development there. It does mean, however, that in those 24 years, China has really developed its military very significantly, and as such has now become much more of a global military power than it was before. In the case of the US, we have seen a very different development. We've seen that the military spending actually decreased from about 2011-12, but now with the Trump administration, we see an emphasis again on the military as an important tool, and therefore we see that clear increase in the US. And that in itself is of concern. Is it really the military power we need right now, or are there other tools we want to refer to when we want to create security in the world?
At the same time, in spite of the political rhetoric, Russia's spending has declined. Help me understand that.
Okay, important there is to understand that, first of all, Russian spending increased until about 2016. So around 2010, Russia came to the conclusion that it had both the economic means and also kind of it felt the need to really modernize its armed forces. It set about in this process, and really it has increased both its spending and also therefore improved its military capability without doubt. But it has come to a point when also the Russian economy, is not in the best state. The international oil prices have dropped a lot since 2014, and that has a very significant impact on the Russian economy. So they have to make a choice there. And also there in Russia, despite the type of government you have there, you can't just continue to spend on your military territory. You have to take into account the other sectors too, and that seems to have a clear impact, meaning that Russian spending has now dropped a few percentage points over the past 2 years.
We've been talking about global powers essentially, but of course you look at other countries in the world too. What are the other regions or countries in particular that you think we should be paying attention to?
I think there's several parts of the world which we should pay attention to, but I'd mention one, and that one is the Middle East, and there's several reasons for that. One reason is that for some countries in the Middle East, we don't have information. There is a lack of transparency, which we think is a concern, but we do know that their spending is very high. For example, the United Arab Emirates. But what's also very important there to mention is that several countries in the region, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Kuwait, and to some extent also Iran, have military spending which as a percentage of their GDP, or in other words, as a percentage of their economy, is particularly high, much higher than it is elsewhere. And that indicates a very high level of militarization in the region. So we see that a country like Saudi Arabia, which isn't that large really, is now the third largest military spender in the world. And that is a significant concern, the more so if you see that countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE also actively use their military in interventions abroad, such as in Yemen.
Mr. Wezeman, thank you very much for your perspective and your detail on this.
You're welcome.